The Caerphilly election results have been brilliant for Plaid. I wish them well. I think it's been, they obviously fought a very good battle, and congratulations to them. For me, and you can always twist statistics in any way you like. Plaid put on, I think it's 15% extra of the vote. Reform basically slapped on 30, 35. In both cases, you now have non-establishment parties that have basically stolen, what's that, 3/4 of all the votes in the election. That in itself shows the status quo is clearly collapsing. However, Plaid is by default a status quo party because it basically continues to espouse all of the same policies pretty much that Labour and the current establishment have pushed for some time. Looking at the results, it looks like they've picked up some of Labour's voters, but a huge part of them not. So effectively, there appears to be some sort of electoral coalition / tactical voting coalition that has voted to keep reform out by in what they've done there, which makes sense. But when that status quo is failing everywhere, all you're actually doing is postponing that impact with reality. It is possible that this kind of tactical voting is going to be enough to keep Reform or some other party out over the coming period at the coming election. That is completely possible. I mean, people should not underestimate the impact it can have within constituency upon constituency. However, it is incredibly hard to do. You have now on the left, you've got the national parties, Plaid Cymru, SNP, etc. In Northern Ireland, it's obviously even more complicated. You've got the Lib Dems, you've got your party, you've got Greens, and then you've got Labour. So you've got potentially, five parties in each of those in each constituency that's going to be plumbing for the same votes. Now, if they get together an electoral coalition, it's possible that they come to some sort of agreement. But the problem is the plum seats that they're all after are going to be highly contested. So how do you split them up in such a way that all parties feel like they're getting something out of it? In terms of Labour, it's much more challenging because Labour basically is positioning itself as the stop reform party. And I can't see how the stop reform party can do a deal with any of these other parties, because by definition you have to be forcing people to make that choice, and so you're going to move to the stage where Labour is going to have to fight with these parties. They're going to have no choice, and those parties will have to fight with Labour. And I would argue, actually, particularly if let's just look at Plaid and say the Greens in much of the country as well. These are parties that see the opportunity to break through. So why would they do a deal with Labour? That maybe they look upon it as kind of the inverse of how many on the right look at it when it comes to the Tories, which is maybe I just want to damage them enough that, yeah, sure, I have to have another election, another parliament of rubbish, but after that, my actual team that I actually really support, has an actual real run at it. And I think this is where that electoral calculus gets very complicated. The Liberal Democrats, to be honest, aren't doing very well. You would think they should be, but they're not when you actually look at the results and what's happening. They've very much become a party of the status quo. They're chundeling through the blue wall to a certain extent, but I'm not sure how much longer that will be successful, because of the fact that they are forever having to basically pivot between trying to appeal to middle of the road liberal conservatives and basically their progressive wing on the other side. And they are fundamentally incompatible on so many levels. I think there's probably going to be a great deal of Liberal Tories who look at the Liberal Democrats and go, not sure actually if I want to be associated with that. So we'll see. It is incredibly complicated. There's a lot of people who are uh, doing reform down for what they've achieved in Wales. I would argue they've actually done very, very well. Um, Obviously, they didn't get the win. Obviously, there is now very clear there's going to be tactical voting, but I still think that's an incredible return for them. What else? What else? In terms of the Tories and reform, as the inverse of potential electoral pacts and everything else, in some ways it's a lot easier. There is effectively only two parties on the right to divvy up right-wing votes. And actually, they are unlikely to hugely overlap in terms of the plum seats. Plum seats for reform are going to be basically the rundown Labour areas, industrial north, stuff like that. Potentially suburban areas around Kent, Essex, things like that. Whereas the Conservatives out in the Shires, they can probably put up a good fight. Certainly in places like Surrey, it will be interesting to see what happens there. It's interesting by the looks of things that Reform and Farage has already come out and basically said they will have a very different manifesto moving forward. It sounds to me like he's going to try and unite the right with a much more pro business radical reform agenda, and basically go take it to the left and kind of go, but you've had your 25 years and that's why we're here. I could be wrong. So it'd be interesting to see how that works for the Tories. My gut would be the fact that as we get nearer to the election and maybe we see more of these, the impact of tactical voting cut in, there's almost certainly going to be conversations between Reform and the Tories on how to divvy things up on the quiet. I think the big ones will be the elections coming up in 2026 and 2027. How much of the impact on tactical voting has there, and does Reform feel even more pressured by it? I just, in terms of the overall trends though, I just don't see that tactical voting substantially changes anything. If you look across most of Europe where this kind of cordon sanitaire has been implemented by the establishment parties, it would be the left in the UK, but in Europe anywhere the cordon sanitaire has been implemented, what you actually see is that it has completely inverse effect of what people want. Yes, it keeps the populist or the emergent party down for a while, but substantially what happens is by creating some sort of grand coalition to keep the populist party or the challenger parties out, what it means is the other parties are all forced to own the status quo, and that's really what's going to happen in the UK now. If you tactically vote to keep Reform out, then you are effectively nodding that you agree with the current status quo, because the current status quo is liberal left wing in terms of our politics. That means that you have to own it as a voter, but also more importantly as the individual parties that are effectively giving a wink for their voters to do it, either directly via an actual pact or indirectly by the conversations that take place. And that basically means that overall you own the status quo, and that basically means that every failure from that status quo continues to be hung around your neck. So, well, what have we got to look forward to if we carry on where we're going at the moment? More economic failure, more social failure, and more state failure, and maybe even a debt crisis. That's basically what people are cementing in at the moment. Now, that's fine. Other people may view that we're not going that way, whatever else. Okay, fine. But if you look at the polls, more and more people think like I'm thinking, and so by locking in this status quo via kind of electoral tactical voting, electoral pacts, and everything else, those parties own that. And so when the moment of change comes, they can't provide change because that's basically what they are. And I think that's the challenge that they're going to have now, all of these parties, as we move forward. You can't offer up any change because fundamentally you're a complete you're completely at right angles with the rest of the emergent majority in the country, shall we say. So overall, and a little bit like how I would argue when it comes to, they say in the financial markets, the trend is your friend. Well, the trend at the moment is very much against the status quo, very much, unfortunately, negative in terms of outcomes within the country, and very much much away from the establishment and the establishment status quo. And what that means is the fact that, yes, it is possible that we may even get to the next election and we may see, some sort of very mutant, weird coalition of parties that's clobbered together to get some sort of overall majority in Parliament and form the next election, the next government. What that actually means, though, is the fact that they will swallow and eat everything that comes and is coming. And it means that when the break does finally end, and that's when enough people across the different constituencies in this country basically say, enough, I can't carry on with this, we've got to do something new. It means that break will be far more violent. And what I mean by that is politically sudden and abrupt. I'm not talking about physical violence, though that's a side thing. It will be much more wide-ranging because people, whichever party or anything else wins at that moment, will have a mandate for real radical change. I mean, like on a level that we've not seen here. There was who was it in the? It was Ian Hislop talking about how Farage will end up being Trumpy and everything else should he get elected. Yeah, the longer this goes on, the likelihood of you getting something like that with a very violent political reaction, and one where the majority of the people who vote for them just kind of go, yeah, great, let's keep going with this, increases by each time that you get a failure. The only thing I would just leave from this, and I apologise it's been slightly less, even less structured than normal. I'm really not feeling great. The turnout for the by-election was basically around about 50%. For a by-election, that's actually really high. However, if you assume a normal turnout of 65 to 70% on an average general election, I would still argue that it's coin toss over where the seat would actually go in that moment. You're voting in a by-election. You just want to give the government a good kicking, which they've done. Congratulations, exactly how it should be. When you get to the next election, you're much more going to look at the world and kind of go, well, where do I want the country to be in 5 years' time, and what does that mean? Or at the next election, whatever it may be. And so at a general election level, I think that there's still a huge amount to play for, and there's time. And as I said, sadly, events and the trends within the country are kind of pushing us in only one direction in terms of where we go to from here. I'm going to sign off because my voice is going. Thank you. Bye.